You found the Backup Wrap-Up, your go-to podcast for all things backup, recovery, and cyber recovery. In this episode, we take a look at a tweet from DOGE that claimed that the GSA saved $1 million a year by converting 14,000 magnetic tapes to something else. A lot of people reached out to me and said, hey, what did I think about this? Is it actually possible to save that kind of money with that number of tapes? First, let me state we will not be actually validating the claim. Why is that? Well, there just isn't enough information. We don't know what tapes they moved off of. We don't know what kind of storage that they moved to. And without that information, it's just simply not possible to actually validate. We're also not going to discuss politics at all. However, we will discuss whether or not it's even possible to save that kind of money by modernizing your tape storage. Plus, you get an embarrassing story about me from the old days. By the way, if you don't know who I am, I'm W. Curtis Preston, aka Mr. Backup. And I've been passionate about backup and recovery for over 30 years, ever since I had to tell my boss that we had no backups of the production database that we had just lost. That's why I do this podcast. I don't want it to happen to me. I don't want it to happen to you. On this podcast, we turn unappreciated backup admins into cyber recovery heroes. This is the Backup Wrap-Up. Welcome to the show. Hi, I'm W. Curtis Preston, aka Mr. Backup, and I have with me a guy that I think might be just as excited as I am about my upcoming window repair, Prasanna Malayandi. How's it going, Prasanna?
I'm good, Curtis. Did you get your sashes?
I got my, they're right here. Look at this. It's beautiful window balance.
So for people who may not be aware, in addition to this being an audio podcast, we also publish our videos on YouTube under the Backup Wrap-Up.
Yeah, you can find it.
You can go see all of our expressions and how we make funny faces, especially me when I have questions. And you could also see Curtis's window sashes.
Yeah, no, not well. I was calling these sashes. It turns out that's the wrong term. This is a window balance. Basically, what this is my window is roughly, it's like 3 feet wide and 2.5 feet high. It's a very big window, and it's a double pane window. It weighs like 30 pounds. And so without with the video, you can see there's these springs.
Yeah.
What this does is it's like the giant springs on your garage door.
I was just going to say that. Yeah. That's what was going to mind. It's like, this is what helps you lift up heavy weights.
Yeah. And it's funny, like a lot of things, I had no idea all that magic was happening behind the scenes until it broke. And then I couldn't lift this window up to save my life. Right. But now I got it out.
Yeah. I think the last podcast episode, after we finished recording, I think you were trying to take it out. And you almost killed yourself.
Yeah. And I could call a guy, right? I could very easily call the guy, but this would cost me like $1,000 to have the guy come. But this part here in my hand was like, two of them was like $20, you know? So if I can fix it for $20, I'm in. And so I knew you'd be excited about it.
See, if it was me, I would have just painted over the gaps, or hired a guy to paint the gaps. So then the window would never open again. Yeah.
Because literally 20 feet that way, I do have a window that the window is shattered. It's cracked beyond repair. Yeah. And so I need to have a guy. And so it's literally, the window is like 2 feet by 16 inches. And the quote I got was $600 just to replace the glass in there. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. So this is why I do stuff. So here's what I wanted to talk about, and I'm going to just warn our listeners that we're going to talk about a topic that whichever side of the political world they sit on, they're immediately going to get excited one way or the other. We are not going to do that. Okay, we are not going to take a political position about this topic. We're just going to talk about the tech. Okay.
Okay.
So, and what I'm referring to is DOGE had, for those not in the U.S., DOGE is this new Department of Government Efficiency run by Elon Musk, and their stated goal is to try to save the government money. And they tweeted last week. Here's I'm going to quote the tweet. The U.S. GSA, so that's the Government Services Administration, IT team just saved $1 million a year by converting 14,000 magnetic tapes, in parentheses, 70-year-old technology for information storage, to permanent modern digital records. So a lot of people texted me and emailed me and said, Curtis, what do you think of this? And I'll be honest, my immediate reaction was incredulity. I was like, how would you save, so first off, 14,000 tapes is a lot, right? And I probably, my first reaction was to the comment about 70-year-old information technology storage.
So I think that is referring to, so how long has tape been around?
70 years.
Okay. So
tape was invented in the 50s,
yes,
right?
But
magnetic tape
yes,
was invented in the 50s.
But what we have today doesn't really look anything like what it was 70 years ago.
No, right. And so perhaps that was just, it certainly seemed like they were trying to make it sound like it was old.
Yes.
Right.
Which it is,
yeah.
but
which it is. It is old, but that's also like saying,
cars.
My car is a 70-year-old technology. Sure.
It's more than 70, but okay.
Yeah, okay, whatever.
Yeah.
How long have cars been around?
1900 something.
Okay. So over 100 years, 120 years maybe.
Yeah.
So and it's based on centuries old technology of the wheel.
Yeah. But so I think, right, given that this was a tweet, an X, whatever you call it these days,
right.
There isn't a lot of information. So I think the first thing to call out is we don't know what type of tape technology they were using.
Right. And what I wanted to do was sort of evaluate this tweet.
Yes.
And just talk about it and see, is this actually something that could be done? Is it possible to save $1 million a year, assuming that you had 14,000 tapes, right?
Yep.
So I'm going to make a big assumption right up front, and that is I'm willing to bet, given that this is a government department, it's one that's been around for a while, that what they're talking about is 9-track tapes.
And also to go along with that, most of their technology runs on COBOL.
This is true, right? Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, most of it, yeah. So again, what we're talking about is most likely mainframes running on COBOL.
Yeah.
Mainframes often used 9-track tapes. Now, for those of you, for the video audience, I'll put up a picture of what a 9-track tape looks like. For the aural, that's AURAL, listeners, basically think of any old movie that you've seen computers in from the 60s and 70s, even the 80s, and think about these giant refrigerator-sized tape drives that had reel-to-reel. That's what a 9-track tape.
Yeah. And when you say reel-to-reel, think like movie projector.
Yes. It's two big reels that, and each reel, and again, just for
size comparisons.
Size comparison. A 9-track tape is about the size of a medium pizza. How's that? For those that have, just to get something in your head.
What if you don't eat pizza?
Who doesn't eat pizza? Get that person out of here. That's what I'm going to have to say. I mean, even vegetarians eat pizza, even vegans eat pizza. Is there a group of people that are like anti-pizza?
For our international audience, they may not. The sizes are different.
Okay, fine.
Yes.
I don't know what to tell the international people.
But one thing, though, is I know we talk about mainframes and we don't know what technologies they use at the Government Services Agency. And so it is hard to say, are the mainframes they're running that old? Because you could still buy a modern mainframe. There are still companies that sell modern mainframes, right? So
Correct.
With modern tape drive technology and other things like that. So we're just not sure what it is.
Here's why I've settled on 9-track tape. We know that the DOGE crew tends to be younger folk, right? And by younger folk, I mean people younger than me, right? So like you,
everyone in the
younger
world,
folk, right? I just think that they walked into the GSA and they saw these monstrosities and said, oh my God, we've got to get rid of this. And honestly, if I walked into a data center and saw 9-track tape drives in production, I would be alarmed, right? And if you're not even used to tape, right? Because we've talked about that not everybody has even seen tape in production, period. If you walked into and you saw those things, you're like, what am I watching, a movie from the 50s?
Yeah.
Right? So I just think that was if they walked in and they saw like a bunch of LTO drives, I don't think it would have had the effect that resulted in the tweet.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think for the listeners, we are considering for this exercise that they are using mainframes, they are using 9-track tapes.
Right.
And there are 14,000 of them.
14,000 of them.
Okay.
So let's talk about what that would look like. So
where would you store 14,000 tapes?
What?
Where would you store 14,000 tapes?
Well, in a tape library. And by tape library, I don't mean robot. I mean literally a library where you would put tapes. I'm older than dirt, so I remember back when we had these things in production back at the bank. And the way you store 9-track tapes is on it's like you literally, they're about the size of a medium pizza. You want to store them vertically. You don't want to store them, you don't want the tape to like.
I was thinking you store it like a book.
You
in like
could,
a shelf.
Theoretically. The problem with that, like storing it like a book, is that they're not like a book and they could roll out. So you want something to sort of hold them in place. So like think about that for a minute. So they're about an inch wide. So 100 tapes is, let's say 120 tapes is 120 inches, which is 10 feet, right? So we've got 14,000 of these things. So what is that? Let's do some math here. So
1,400, 140 times 10, 1,400 feet.
So 1,400 feet. So they're a little over, they're about 13 inches tall, right? So then you're going to have some space around that for the rack. So let's say 18 inches, right? So we could do like 4 or 5 high, I think. So it's going to be a pretty big. The point is, it's going to be a pretty big
room to store,
physical room to hold 14,000 tapes. That's number one. The second thing is that the actual drives are monstrous.
It's like the size of a fridge, right? You were mentioning.
I think it's 33 inches wide. That's a reasonably sized fridge. And then they're also really deep.
Yeah.
Because there's all kinds of stuff in there about, like there's a vacuum, literally a vacuum to maintain tension on the tape. And it's just really, it's a very complicated series of mechanics to be able to have this tape do what you want it to do. So, and being a government organization, you are going to have multiple of them, because no one has made a 9-track drive in years. So you probably have a small collection of them in order to have enough running drives, right? Because Well, there's a couple of possibilities here, right? You have a small number, and then you have a very expensive service contract of somebody to come in and maintain them. That's highly possible.
It's the government, probably likely.
Yeah, it's probably likely, right? So they probably have like 3 or 4, and then they have a service contract so that at least one of them is running at all times. Right. So just the physical presence of these tape drives and their associated tapes are going to take up a significant amount of space, which has a cost. I don't know if it approaches $1 million a year, but again, I've never built and maintained a government building before.
Yeah.
Right? But as soon as we start talking about maintaining tape drives that haven't been made for 20, 30 years, then very quickly that could approach $1 million.
Thing on my mind, though. So there are 14,000 tapes.
Uh-huh.
And assuming they're 9-track, that seems like a lot of data. But you're smiling, which means which means that you disagree with that statement.
Yeah. So, how much data do you think? So we're going to go with, again, we're assuming all kinds of things. I'm going to, for the purposes of discussion, assume that we're talking about the biggest, fastest tape drive, that, you know, a 9-track tape drive that they made. How much data do you suppose is on such a tape?
So given that it's probably from the 70s, 80s, and everything was smaller, and I know we've talked about your experiences at the bank and how you had servers that were like 100 gigs or less.
Yeah.
Right? I'm going to go with like 10 gigs.
That's adorable. So, at the latest available 9-track tape drive stored 150 megabytes.
Wait, what? Gigabytes? Megabytes?
Megabytes. 150 megabytes.
Compressed or uncompressed?
There was no compression.
No.
So, 150 megabytes. Yeah.
So okay. So that's not a lot of data. So assuming
so it's both. It's so physically big. The drives are really physically big. The tapes are really physically big, but they don't hold squat in terms of data. Like 150 megabytes, you can't even buy like a thumb drive.
So
hold 150 megabytes now.
So what are they? So assuming that this is our backup infrastructure,
I think it's their archive infrastructure.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask.
I don't think they're making new tapes on this infrastructure.
Okay, so this is all just, which also makes sense because it's been running for so long. I could be wrong. Yeah. No, I would hope that they are only using it for archive, but that makes sense, right? You have less data, less frequent data. You just write it out and you keep it stored because you need to put it somewhere for the next 100 years.
Yeah, which brings up an interesting side issue that has nothing to do with cost. If they wrote this data on these tapes, and these are archive tapes from 10, 20, 30 years ago, maybe even older, those tapes are not made to hold data that long. Right? Modern LTO technology is, rated at holding data for 30 years. This stuff, there is relatively zero chance that there isn't bit rot on some of this data, right? And that will only get worse, increase with time.
Yeah. And so, do you think that they've never touched these tapes?
I think that some of these tapes have never been touched. Yeah.
So, if you never touch the tapes and no one knows about it, do you need to keep them?
If bit rot happens and no one is there to read it, did it really happen?
Exactly.
Well, that is a topic that we talk about a lot, right? If you've got tapes, so the question is, do you know what's on those tapes, right? Do you have a reason that I'm guessing, and I think it's a perfectly valid assumption. I'm assuming that that they have a reason to keep the data that's on this tape.
Yeah.
This is historical GSA data, and they have to keep it for, it's literally their purpose in life, right?
Yeah.
They have to be able to go back and pull up this stuff. I just don't think they do it very often.
Yeah.
Right. So meanwhile, and I hearken back. It's not the same technology, but I do hearken back to what happened when they started pulling out all the old celluloid movies. Right. So, for example, when they went to, for those of you that are movie buffs, read the story of what happened when they went back to do a re-release of Star Wars. Star Wars was stored on the old celluloid stuff, and it was a hot mess.
Yeah.
They almost didn't get it, right? So basically the point is when you go to pull that stuff, also they lost the original tapes of the moon landing.
Well, what else?
Which does not help for those who don't think it actually happened. But
You know what else is also people are realizing they're losing their data for?
What?
Apparently, I think it's Warner Brother movies from the early 2000s.
Yeah, I did read about that.
Yeah, they're no longer viewable. So
yeah, so that is a totally separate reason why they should potentially look at migrating this old data.
Yeah.
But the question is, the claim was that they could save money by doing this migration, and most of my friends who reached out to me, had claims like, BS. It's not true. It's no possible.
Okay, so before we get into the second part, right, of saving money, so in the tweet it said that they are using permanent. What was the phrase that they used?
It said permanent modern digital records.
Okay, so
I don't know what that means.
Does this sound like they're going to store it in some database, or maybe object store or something like that? Whatever it is.
Yeah,
right.
There was even less information about the second half than there was about the first half.
Okay, but let's say whatever they pick, right? They're going to have to buy some storage system.
I'll just say this. I'm not even going to try to justify or to explain what it is that they're doing. I'll just say, if I were doing it, this is what I would do.
Okay, what would you do?
Yeah. So, first off, well, there's a couple of different choices. But I'm saying if you were already using tape and you already have a system that knows how to talk to tape, I would probably continue to use tape. I just would move off of the old 9-track tapes and onto something more modern like LTO, right? I would probably migrate to LTO 9, which is the most recent, because we're talking about really long-term storage anyway.
So how much data can you store in an LTO 9?
45 terabytes.
And you said that the 9-track were 150 megabytes?
Yeah, so here's the thing. You could fit all 14,000 tapes on less than about 20% of a single LTO9 cartridge. So they could make 10 copies, and they would have spent $1,000 on media.
Crazy.
Yeah. Now, I will just say this: it's not gonna be overnight, right? That was one of the critiques that people had of the tweet, is they spoke about it in the past tense.
Yeah.
There is zero possibility that they've done this already.
Yeah.
I think they just sort of figured out that they're referring to it.
Yeah. Okay. So I think what you said makes total sense. Now, if I was them though, so I want to play the other side.
Okay.
Right. So if I was them and I said, okay, it's going to be a disk-based system, doesn't matter how, right? It's going to be stored on disk. This is probably important data, which means that I might need another copy somewhere for high availability purposes, right? And disaster recovery. And then, by the way, this is important data. I don't want to lose it, which means I probably need to take a backup of it, right? So now I have 3 additional copies
in two different
in 2 different places. I have 3 additional copies on 2 separate pieces of media, one of which is offsite, right? The famous 3-2-1 rule. And all of this costs money, and I'm probably running this in some data center, not under someone's desk, which means that it's taking power and cooling and maintenance and upkeep, patching, security issues of keeping everything online, all the rest of the stuff that we talk about on this podcast. And so they're saying that doing all of that cost is going to be saving them $1 million versus even just keeping it on 9-track. Forget about even moving to LTO.
Yeah. So you're making an assumption there.
Yes.
That they would want to keep it on disk, and I'm saying I don't think they have a requirement to keep it online. I think that this is archival data, and I think it's fine that it's on tape. I would have it on multiple tapes, and I would have those tapes in multiple locations. I do not think there's a requirement to have one of those copies on disk.
I don't think they need to, but my interpretation of the tweet was they're probably storing it on disk somewhere.
Already, or
they're going to archive it to disk somewhere.
Yeah,
it's my interpretation.
Those words hurt my ears.
I know.
Archive to disk, but I'm not going to take that out because I might want to work for a company that does that. But so I just don't think that's a requirement.
Yeah.
Right. And this is about saving money. So I would assuming this again. If I was running the show, I would say, what's our requirement? How often do we read this stuff? Well, basically never. So I would say, okay, well, let's make sure we make it on multiple copies, multiple tapes. And here's what's interesting is you could, even though purchasing 14,000 backup tapes, just that is going to cost you over $1 million, right? But it'd be one-time purchase, and then you'd be good for another 30 years, right? Even if what you did was a one-to-one conversion because one of the problems is, even though it'd be the most inefficiently stored LTO tape in history, right? You'd have 150 megabytes assuming each of those tapes was full, which it probably isn't the case. You'd have 150 megabytes on a 45 terabyte tape. It'd be ridiculous. But one of the problems when we start talking about moving forward with tech like this is that you might not be able to consolidate the data from multiple tapes onto one tape. If you could, then that would be the way to go.
Yeah.
If you could figure out how to tell the mainframe, again, this is not the newest technology, right? If you could figure out how to tell the mainframe to take the 14,000 tapes and consolidate them onto one tape. And then once you make that one tape, then you make multiple copies of that one tape. Then that would be amazing.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure if that's going to be possible without a lot of specialized tech, which then goes back to the cost issue.
But you're still going to need some tech, even if you move it to a digital modern. I can't remember the words. A modern digital format.
Yeah.
Right. You're still going to need that mainframe to read the old data and write it out somewhere. Which means you're probably going to need to find someone who actually understands how to do this.
You will need those people. Regardless of how you do it, you're going to need some people that know what they're talking about, right? Like, my employer, right? Yeah. S2 Data does this all the time. Yeah. You're going to need somebody that knows that's good at mainframe tapes, understands all of that stuff. If it's the better the person you get, the better the possibility that you might actually be able to consolidate tapes onto. That would be the true goal. Yeah. If you could consolidate those 14,000 tapes onto one LTO, that would be amazing. It's just, I'm not sure. Again, I'm not even, as old as I am, I'm not a mainframe guy. Yeah. I've seen mainframes. I've seen 9-track drives. I've never actually have to drive one, right? Yeah. So you need someone older than me, right? We have those people at S2 Data, right? We have one guy that's like, this was his life, right? And he's brilliant. But like, you got to pull that guy out of retirement, pay him lots of money to figure this out and see if there's a way to migrate those tapes. All of that will have a cost. Having said that, it's still possible that you could migrate all those tapes. You would have a one-time cost. You still would save $1 million a year. It's just, we're not talking about it until like next year.
Yeah. I just thought of another possibility.
Okay, go ahead.
They just go to the local computer store or Amazon and they buy an external hard drive.
By the way, you're killing me. By the way, let me just talk about another aspect of this. This is going to take a minute.
Yep.
Right? So I ran some numbers, and assuming the maximum transfer rate, assuming all of the tape drives are full, assuming that the tape drives all work all the time, which is not a valid assumption. Every time I use old tape drives, they don't work. They fail on a pretty regular basis. And assuming that you could do this 24/7, which you can't.
And you have people there 24/7
You have
to
people
swap
there
cable.
24/7, which you're not going to do that. We're talking. I think it came out like 1,100 hours, right? When you factor in a 9-to-5 work week, when you factor in let's get 3 running tape drives, when you factor in the amount of project management that this is going to have, because anyone who's ever done any sort of government work knows that you've got to prove your process. You've got to spend a ton of time proving your process before you can go do this, because you're doing a one-way trip, right? To use Musk terms, we're going to Mars, right? you can't, we forgot to put the tire on. You got to sort it out before. You've got to do this one time, right? So you just very quickly add some. So I came up with an estimate of 6 months, of time during which you're going to be paying someone who's $300 to $500 an hour. So you're looking at $300,000 or so in professional services. That's just for one person, and then they're probably gonna need some support people. Yeah. There's a lot of moving around and moving tapes around. So this is gonna take a while. It's not gonna. So there's my opinion. There's zero chance that this has happened already, but I don't think that makes the tweet untrue.
And this is, I think, goes back to something we talked about before. If bit rot happens, does anyone notice it?
Well, that's the other thing is you won't really know if bit rot happened, most likely.
Yeah.
When you go to transfer the.
Well, and so another question is, maybe they just ditch the old things and say, keep the old stuff on the old stuff. Moving forward, let's start using.
Well, they can't. But the point is that has a cost, right? There's an ongoing cost. This is the discussion that people get in. There's an ongoing cost to having those tape drives. You have to maintain them. They have to continue to work. Having those tape drives, having 14,000 tapes. We just talked about the fact that having, what did I say? 100 of them?
Yeah.
Having 100 of them is 10 feet long.
But let's assume that they decide
there's power and cooling for all of that.
But let's just assume they're going to keep one tape drive.
Okay, you can't, but go ahead.
Okay. Let's say they're going to keep 2 and they're going to keep all the tapes.
Okay.
And they're not going to touch any of the old stuff.
Okay.
And they're going to say, moving forward, we're going to use a new form of archive.
Uh-huh.
Right? That doesn't use those old 9-track tapes.
Okay, which they've probably already done all this.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
So going back to what you had said previously or earlier, maintenance and upkeep and all the rest for these tape drives, do you think that is where they're going to try to, plus managing and swapping out the tapes and everything else, do you think that is potentially where they're saying they're getting $1 million savings from?
I think that's exactly what I'm saying.
Okay.
I think that they're saying that the cost, the physical footprint of how big these tape drives are, how big the tapes are, just the physical presence of them has a cost. It's not $1 million a year, at least I don't think.
Yeah.
But then there's a contract. There is a service contract to maintain those tape drives.
Yeah.
There's also, they got some person.
People swapping tapes.
That looks like me that understands how this stuff works. And they're not cheap, right? So I think that it's totally true that just the mere existence, the continued existence of these systems is costing them $1 million a year, because of the government aspect.
Yeah.
and the fact that this stuff really, really, really has to work, and so that that costs.
But my question, though, maybe I'm not stating it clearly, is what if you left the old stuff around and just said, old stuff, leave it as it is. We'll pay the sunk cost and the ongoing cost of storing things. And we'll get rid of the service people.
Sorry to interrupt, but I get what you're saying. And I'm just saying that just keeping the old stuff is costing you $1 million a year. If you can spend $1 million or something like that,
and move off,
and then your $1 million a year goes away.
Yeah,
this is a beautiful thing, right? That's what I'm saying. I guess what I'm saying is DOGE's claim doesn't sound astronomically impossible. I do think it's impossible that they've done it already, but I think it's highly possible that they're going to do it moving forward. It's going to take them several months, right? Because of the amount of project management and time, and just the sheer, it's 1,100 hours to read 150 megabytes off of old tape drive.
And this is no different than companies that say are migrating from LTO5 to LTO9.
Well, it's just a little bit more extreme.
It's a little bit more extreme, but it's something similar. Like, this is what companies normally...
Also, sorry to interrupt you, zero level of automation here.
That's true.
There's no tape library for 9-track drives.
No.
You need a person standing in front of the tape drives to mount them, feed the tape over to do the thing, and put it over on the, it is a very manual process. Yeah. Whereas you could rent probably
a robot,
a tape library that you could fit 14,000. It'd be a big tape library, right? It'd be a couple hundred feet long.
Yeah.
100 feet long. It'd be like 50 feet long. To put 14,000 tapes in it, you could push a button and you could come back and it would be done.
Yep.
So it's that's why I'm saying it's an extreme version of what you're saying.
No, that's something I did not think about. Yeah, was that manual effort.
Yeah, very, very manual.
So are you looking for a job in standing in front of those tape drives, Curtis, for the next 6 months?
Well, first I'd have to learn 9-track tape drives. What's funny is I used to manage 9-track. I used to manage people that mounted 9-track tape drives. And I did used to have to mount them, but I never actually had to be the one on the keyboard doing the thing. And funny story that figures in that. So 100 years ago, when I was at the bank, and we were a mainframe shop, right? We were a credit card company. The mainframe was in Dallas. We were in Delaware. We had what are called channel attached tape drives, right? So basically the tape drives were in Delaware. The computers were in Dallas. You could cut a tape in Delaware from the data that was in Dallas.
Mm-hmm.
And that was amazing to me back in the day, right? The funny thing was, to get data from upstairs to downstairs, we had to cut a tape. And we had to bring that tape down to downstairs, right? And it was a really big operation to cut these tapes and to get them, because this was a credit card company and we absolutely played the float. What does that mean? The moment your money comes in, we're going to play with it. We're going to speculate on the market and all the things that a bank would do. Play with your money, and then credit it to your account like a couple days later.
Yeah,
that's just the way it works, right? If you weren't aware that that's happening, that's absolutely happening. And so it was. I don't know about a couple days, but it was definitely some time. And so it was a really big deal of getting these tapes downstairs. And one year we had a mainframe outage. Our first ever. I was there for almost 3 years, and it was our first ever mainframe outage. And we were in, and we had. My memory was that we had 3 of these 9-track tape drives. It was like half of the space in our tape library. Tape library meaning the room where our tapes were. And we had a team of people whose job it was to mount these tapes. It was well acknowledged that the moment the mainframe came back up, the moment the little light came on the channel attached tape drives, we were to start mounting tapes.
Yeah.
Because we want to play the float. So my boss's boss came by. I was already in there. I was like, guys, you understand? Here's the thing. You see, I want you like standing at parade rest. And, that's a military term. Standing, with your hands behind your back, standing in front of this tape library, watching for that light. I heard the mainframes coming on. The moment that light turns red, or probably green. Whatever that light comes on, put the tape on. Actually, I think we probably pre-mounted the tapes.
Yeah.
The moment that light turns on, press the button.
Yeah.
Start spinning tapes and get those tapes down to payments. And the boss's boss, Tom Themides was his name. And he came in there to make sure that I knew so that they knew, how important this was, right? And so, this did not happen every day.
Yeah.
We did not get basically
the big guy coming down
at the band. Yeah. And he's in there. And so I'm like, yeah, I got it. Mr. Themides, I've got it. You see these guys. I am not kidding. I literally had them standing in front of the tape drive. 3 of them. 3 tape drives, 3 people. We're on it. And he's like, okay. So he goes over, and I go to let him out of the room. And we had these maglock doors. And the way it would work is if the door open, and we had this piece of metal that would block a gap between the door, so that you wouldn't be able to open the
sensor
detector thing.
Yeah.
So there was a button to press to open up the maglock if the door got opened wrong. And so I pressed the button to let him out.
The wrong button.
Yeah.
Which button did you push, Curtis?
The EPO button.
Which, for those who may not be familiar.
Emergency power off.
And how long did it take it to recover from that?
About 3.5 hours. This was a new building. No one knew how to turn the power back on. So I extended the first ever mainframe outage by like 3 hours.
Curtis. You still had a job there, though, right?
I did. I did not get fired. The funniest thing is, my boss, Susan Davidson, great woman. She was that kind of boss that you wanted to have, that basically, if you did something stupid, she would shield you from like this guy. But in this case, this guy was standing right there.
Yeah, exactly.
And he saw me do the thing. And Susan Davidson came in. She came in the door, and she's like, "It's really quiet in here." And she goes, and she said, What's going on? And I'm like, somebody pressed the EPO button, and and this person who would normally like protect me from such things, who the fuck would press the EPO button right now? That would be me. And like, actually, the guy Tom Tomato, he like pointed at me.
Oh, Curtis, do you hang your head in shame?
I did. She did not fire me, but I did quit shortly after that. Anyway, so long story short, I think it's highly possible DOGE may have found a way to save $1 million. I think it's highly possible that this particular claim could be true, and I wish them the best of luck.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, day in the life of tape drives. Day in the life of really old tape. How's that? All right. Well, thanks for letting me think through this,
Yeah, no, it was good. Definitely learned about 9-track tapes more than I ever want to. By the way, I actually have been around 9-track tapes.
Yeah?
Yeah, my dad used to work for a company that did mainframes, and every once in a while on the weekends, I would go in with him to just hang out, and he'd be working, and he'd let me into their labs, and there were 9-track tapes in there. So
this was like in the 90s?
Yeah, late 80s, early 90s.
How old were you in this?
Yeah. Probably 8, 9, something like that.
You're killing me, Smalls.
Yeah.
I hope everyone else listening feels as old as I do right now. Thanks for listening. That is a wrap. The Backup Wrap-Up is written, recorded, and produced by me, W. Curtis Preston. If you need backup or DR consulting, content generation, or expert witness work, check out backupcentral.com. You can also find links for my O'Reilly books on the same website. Remember, this is an independent podcast, and any opinions that you hear are those of the speaker and not necessarily an employer. Thanks for listening.